Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Please go ahead and mute yourself if you're not already muted, and we're going to get started in just 1 minute. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled 5 Skills for Turning Ideas into Innovations with Greg Roth, IOM. Greg is a keynote speaker who teaches you to take risks. He delivers story-rich ideas about crazy ideas, creative enthusiasm, and the culture of experiments we can design to improve our lives and our work. He studies challenges as a way to change behavior, build skills, and achieve big breakthroughs. He earned his degree in journalism with a minor in coaching from Millersville University of Pennsylvania, and he's a 2010 alum of the Institute program. This is the final webinar in our series, but there are many more coming. You can find a full schedule of upcoming webinars on our website on the webinars page found under the curriculum tab. Greg is going to be referencing a handout that can be found on that page, and we'll also drop a link in the chat right now. Thanks for everyone for joining. Please go ahead and mute yourself if you're not already muted. You can also ask a question using the raised hand button located at the top of the screen next to the chat button, or just drop your question in the chat. If you've raised your hand, the symbol will appear white and be underlined in purple, and we'll call on you. Thank you very much for joining. Take it away, Greg.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to be here with everyone. Good morning to everyone if you're out west, or good afternoon here on the East Coast. Exactly one slide about me. So I'm one of the only people to have worked at both ACC and the U.S. Chamber. The only other person I can think of is Allie Williams, who, congratulations to Allie, is now the CEO of the Greater Bethesda Chamber here in D.C. So as you can see, I've worked at a few associations over the years. I've also worked with a lot of associations as a speaker and consultant over the last few years. So I want to start off today by telling you two stories about two very different experiences at two different organizations about having new ideas. Story number one. The first is a healthcare association here in DC. It's a big place. It has like $150 million budget a year, a really large association. They wanted to develop a new product for their members. So they hired a bunch of consultants. They spent 6 months learning the design thinking process. They went through a bunch of feasibility studies. They came up with a bunch of different ideas for products. They tested them out. They put them together. They took them to the board 6 months after they started. They showed the board and said, here's what we'd like to do. And the board said, nah, not for us. And that was it. That was the end of the story. It's a horror story if it were a movie. Story number two, at Lego. We have now, you guys know Legos, like you have to imagine it's a fun place to work, but they take their process of developing new ideas very seriously. They don't just develop digital products, they develop actual physical products too. So they were always looking to improve things, improve the way that they do things. And so a couple of years ago, they decided to redesign their entire product development process because they wanted to get better and faster at testing out new ideas. So they adopted what's called a design sprint. Now, a design sprint is a method that was invented at Google Ventures about 10 years ago. Google Ventures is the startup incubator at Google. So this process tests ideas in a matter of 1 week. And so Lego adopted the sprint process because they wanted to avoid the type of thing that happened in the first story that I just told you. You spend a lot of time developing something, and then for some reason or another, it just never makes it to market, right? So they have refined the design sprint process. It takes 1 week, and they run 150 sprints internally every single year to test out all of their new ideas. So what do we learn from these two stories? Well, first, new ideas don't need to take forever. Sure, it may take months to refine an idea once you have an initial either prototype or a model for what you are trying to do, but it really only takes a week to go from nothing to something valuable. Thought number 2, new ideas need tangible discussion. The idea of the lone creative genius that just comes up with a wonderful idea is largely, even Thomas Edison, who has over 1,000 individual patents, had a team working with him. In fact, some would argue that Edison's greatest invention is the cross-functional team, which he depended on for all of his inventions. And third, new ideas rarely start out ready. As you're going to see in this presentation, most ideas don't work right away, or the ones that do usually go through different versions before they are ultimately successful. So whenever we want to try something new, try out a new idea, develop a new idea, we need to learn to be both persistent and patient. Unfortunately, these 3 methods are how we come up with ideas most of the time, and they do not help us. The first one, represented by the little, what do you call those things? I can't even remember now. I'm drawing a blank. That's supposed to be best practices. Ribbon, that's what I was trying to say. Best practices. These are really just things that have happened before. The word best is kind of a lie in a lot of cases, right, with best practices. The second one is brainstorming. Now, brainstorming is a sometimes fun social activity that was invented in the advertising world, but is proven in study and after study to be ineffective. It is not a good use of group time. And third, R&D. Well, that sounds good until you realize what R&D stands for, and usually it's rip off and duplicate. I think we all know that in the chamber and association worlds very well. I've been through a lot of R&Ds myself. So those are the 3 ways that a lot of times we try to take shortcuts to develop new ideas. So what does it mean to be an idea-driven organization, a place where ideas can be developed and creative thinking thrives? Well, it's not about being the most creative person or being the most knowledgeable or having the best technology. Instead, it's a collection of skills that translate across all forms of shaping ideas in any type of job. As an organization or as a person, you are able to discover true insights, diverge from the same old ideas, debate the strengths and weaknesses of ideas, developing rough draft or prototypes of new ideas so you can, 5, demo or present them for users, members, or leaders who matter to you. These are the 5 skills that we'll be talking about that contribute to a culture of ideas and innovation. What's nice about these 5 skills is that they're also a process by themselves. Taken individually, when you stack them on top of each other, this becomes what I call the 5 Ds of a creative sprint. You can go faster, you can concentrate on one mode at each time. It's a lean and flexible version of the Google Design Sprint that I mentioned earlier. The point is that in a short amount of time, you can start from a broad understanding of a problem or a challenge and narrow it down to a potential solution. So with that, let's take a journey through the 5 Ds. First one is discover. Your team needs to get smart. You're not going to fix anything if you don't understand it. That's why we start by, quote unquote, slowing down. Your data, your research, your findings, they don't have to be perfect or even complete, but every member of your team, now imagine you have a team that's going to work on a new idea. Every member of your team should be informed, because the goal of phase 1 is to gain insight about the challenge that you're deciding to tackle. Whatever problem it is that you want to fix, whatever new thing that you want to invent, the first phase is about getting everyone aligned and on the same page. Really, every discovery process or the discovery skill is a detective story. And if we think about great detectives, actual or fictional, they were masters of observation and inquiry. That's why the ability to ask questions is more important at the start than having some whiz-bang solution right away. We have to get away from trying to solve problems immediately before we really understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're a children's hospital and you want to reinvent your patient check-in experience. Now, you could copy what other hospitals are doing, but if you want to try to collect some other insights that might open new possibilities, you can also cook up an analogy. And this is what Nemours Hospital in Florida did. They spent a day with JetBlue. Now, why JetBlue? Because they are the highest rated airline for customer service. And I think we all know the airlines are a wonderful industry for customer service, right? Ha ha. So JetBlue gets the highest marks in an industry that often has a less than sterling reputation for customer service. They started with one question, Nemours did. What if our hospital were like an airport? What can we imagine would be useful in one setting that would transfer to our setting? So they visited with JetBlue. They gained a bunch of insights, and they thought, well, this was a great experience. Why don't we keep doing this with every other type of child-centered business they could think of? Museums, schools, toy stores, zoos. After they did that, they had a wealth of research that they had collected from asking questions at each one of these stops. They gained a better understanding of what exactly they were trying to do by looking outside of their own industry. Another example, Surveymonkey is a company that takes asking questions to an extreme. They're a survey company, of course, that's what they do. And they frame their corporate culture around one word, curiosity. They name their conference rooms after curious places in the world, so perhaps your next meeting is here in Stonehenge. They also found the largest curious George doll that they could, and they planted it right in the middle of the workspace. They encourage and they reward curiosity across their organization. A couple ways they do that is they have town hall meetings at which they celebrate the question of the week. They honor the person, the staff member that asked the best question in any meeting that week. They also have a peer recognition program where I, as an employee, can nominate a fellow employee for a curiosity award for asking a tough question or providing valuable insights, or just having the courage to talk about something that a lot of times you might not want to bring up, might be a difficult subject. So, and they even have a signature conference called the Curiosity Conference. This is an event that celebrates turning feedback into action. So all of this about their curiosity culture is based on the skill of asking questions. And that's what we're doing in the discover phase, or with the discover skill. So we too often focus on solutions without asking any questions. It's a classic cart before the horse situation. It's a bad move for innovation. A favorite book of those who work in the creative space that I've learned is this book called A More Beautiful Question. And here's a great quote from that book: knowing the answers will help you in school, knowing how to question will help you in life. So what is an innovation question? Well, in A More Beautiful Question, Warren Berger argues that there are three types of innovation-centric questions: why, how, and what if. Asking why leads us to the reasons we do the things we do. Asking how opens up new perspectives or the different ways we can look at problems. And asking what if allows us to explore roads we haven't taken before. So what I would like to do for our first exercise, we'll do an exercise for each one of the 5 Ds, is we have an example case right here, and we'll send you into breakout rooms. And I want you guys to ask only questions. Use the what if, the why, how, and what if questions. And just ask questions about this particular circumstance. Your new member welcome video got high marks from the board. You developed it. Everyone that was involved in the process was excited about it, but people aren't viewing it consistently. So what do we think is happening with it? So in this room, in your small room discussions, I want you to use the question prompts and just ask questions. You don't have to answer anything, but practice answering questions and see who comes up with what the group feels is the most insightful question. So that's what we're going to do. Isabel or Andrew, whenever we're ready, we can send people to rooms.
I am starting rooms right now. Anyone who is left in the main session, please feel free to use that as a breakout room.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Looks like I gotta flip through to get back to where I was in the PowerPoint. Does anyone want to share an especially insightful question that they heard in the breakout rooms? Go ahead and type it in the chat. I will keep moving with the presentation. So, phase number 2, skill number 2 is divergent thinking. So, also in the chat, we can try a little exercise, a little quick activity. Typing in the chat, come up with ideas for using a brick besides building a wall. What are other things that you can use a brick for? Boat anchor, thanks Mark Johnson, I like that. Landscaping edging, yes, use those myself. Bookshelves, spoken like a true college graduate. Paperweight. I'd like to know where you guys are working where papers are just flying around so much that you need a brick for a paperweight. Smash things, yeah, definitely. All right, good. What you're doing is one of the better known exercises in divergent thinking. We still aren't trying to solve the problem with skill number 2 and step number 2. Instead, we're thinking laterally about all of the potential options and choices we can generate. And this comes from a lot of the questions that we asked in step number 1 in discovery. So, we just tried this as a group here in the chat, but studies repeatedly show that individuals working independently produce better ideas and a bigger range of ideas than everyone in a room together. This is why brainstorming is an ineffective use of everyone's time. If you guys are invited to brainstorms, if you're conducting brainstorms, let's maybe rethink that a little bit of how we can use the entire group's time. In brainstorming sessions, what happens is only one person can talk at a time, and it's really hard to think of your own ideas when someone else is talking about their ideas. And often the loudest voices win out in those situations. And you might have 6 people in a room, but you really only get input from, say, like 2. So what we do instead is we use individual divergent thinking and send people off on their own to come up with their own ideas and then bring them back to the group. To give you another example, let's talk about my friend Chris Bishop. He's the creative director at PBS Kids. Now, a few years ago, they released a new video game called Cart Kingdom. It's a free virtual world where kids can go on these quests, play games, hang out, craft, explore, and drive around this cool little world that they came up with. It was the first time that PBS launched a multiplayer game of this type, and they're competing against large corporations like Nickelodeon. So it was a first time for them, and it was a huge success. They've had over 15 million kids register and play the game. Why do we think that happened? Well, one of the draws for the game was the individual cart itself. Kids get to ride around these cool looking vehicles. And the original premise for the game, for Cart Kingdom, is that Chris and his team would maybe design maybe 2 dozen different carts the kids could choose from. Mostly ones with engines, but maybe a few silly ones too. You can see there's a taco one right there. But they proved so popular that the kids wanted more choices. So Chris and his team got to work. They started just trying to design every single crazy idea they could come up with. Because honestly, when you have millions of kids asking for something, you don't really have time to come up with the best ideas. You just kind of have to start cycling through like all the possibilities. So they kept going and they kept developing new carts. And soon they produced over 350 carts, and they added a new feature to the game, which is constantly adding new designs and releasing them every week. They even released secret codes for secret carts. So the carts actually became the star of this video game in a lot of ways. And at the beginning of the process, they didn't think that they had that many ideas, but then they realized the more they created carts, the more ideas they had. The more they tried, the more they produced. The more they diverged, the more that they came up with. So the key was to empower members of the design team individually to come up with their own ideas. And honestly, who wouldn't want to ride around the popsicle cart, especially on a really hot day? So it's really summed up by this thinking right here. It's a very simple rule that Chris and his team followed. Best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. So that's what the skill of divergence is. And this is one of the most used divergent thinking techniques. All it takes is a simple sheet of paper. So if you have a sheet of paper for this activity that we're going to do right now, what you do is you take it and you fold it 3 times to where you have 8 panels, And you then will take the challenge called Crazy Eights. And what that means is that in each panel, for your challenge, whatever it is you're working on, you try to fill in each panel with a different idea. So you try to get 8 ideas in 8 minutes is why it's called Crazy Eights. Now we won't do 8 minutes. We'll give you like 5 minutes. See if you can come up with 3 or 4 or 5 completely different ideas for this. How can you delight a new member at the 30-day mark? Now, my friend Joey Coleman has a book out called Never Lose a Customer Again. Its original working title was The First 100 Days. And he did all this research about how customer experience in the first 100 days shapes the retention process at the year mark. So with that example of an exercise or example challenge in mind, how can you delight a new member at the 30-day mark? Take your piece of paper, take 8 sheets of paper, however you want to work on your divergent ideas. Take 5 minutes and see what type of ideas you can come up with. And I'll just show you what it looks like again. Now, we don't have to go to rooms for this. You guys can all do this at your desk. So we'll just start the timer at, say, 5 minutes right now. And we'll see you after you've had some ideas. All right, I'm going to call this webinar back to order. How did everyone do with their crazy eights? If anyone, most people have their cameras off, I guess, but if anyone wants to turn their camera on and hold up their handiwork, I would love to see it. Well, just know the offer is there. You would like to accept it. So from here, let's move on to number 3. Third D is debate. This is where the team reconvenes to analyze and assess the creative ideas that each individual came up with through divergent thinking. Now that your team has generated a bunch of ideas, it's time for the group to hone in on the solutions that carry the most promise and decide how to test and validate their potential. But in order to do that, we use the group to examine the pros and cons of all the different ideas that we've collected. The debate is not with people. The debate is about each side of the ideas, pros and cons, plus and minuses, potential upside, potential downside. That means seeing different perspectives when we, as we see in this photo, look at the exact same thing. This is part of convergent thinking. This is about making choices. This is what groups are good at. Individuals are better at divergent thinking and generating ideas. Groups are better at evaluating ideas. And this is the process that they use at The Onion. As a matter of fact, they've used a version of this for the 30 years that they've been in existence. And you know, the Onion is an incredible success story. It started as basically a side project in one of the founders' houses in their attic, and now it gets 8 million visitors every month. So here's how things work at The Onion. If you've ever wondered how they come up with this stuff, well, Monday morning, each of the writers is told to bring in 15 to 25 headline ideas for the fake news site. And there are typically like 8 people at each table. So that's 150 to 200 some ideas. They have this meeting a few times over 2, sometimes 3 days. And over that span, they might evaluate as many as 600 ideas. And they need to go through them quickly and say, is this funny or is it not funny? Why is it funny? Is this going to get us in trouble? Is this something we've done before? Really just kind of debating like whether or not this is something that we want to use for our next update, or when they were doing the newspaper, our next issue. So they narrow the 600 down to just 16. Then they decide whether it's a full story, a short blurb, or just a headline. The way they do this, they debate and critique each headline. They go through them really, really quick, but they offer input on each one, whether it's timely, whether it's fresh, whether it's up to the standards that they feel like they've set for themselves over 3 decades. So really the thinking here is that we are going through very brief ideas to see what promise they might hold and if it's something that we would be willing to develop further. This is obviously in stark contrast to the Healthcare Association example, where we worked really, really deeply on something over a long amount of time, and that you may need to put in time to develop a new product or a new service. But initially, in order to get feedback on something, you should keep it much, much quicker. That helps the debate process move a lot smoother and a lot quicker. Now, admittedly, there are a lot of ground rules for effective debate or critique. You should avoid the types of language that create walls or barriers to honest conversations. It should not be personal in any sort of way. And I think what's a really important point is that you get rid of the judgment and replace it with more open-ended discussion. So you can see that it's not about, I don't like this idea. It's, I'm struggling with understanding why this is good or what this is going to do for us. That puts the onus on someone that holds the other perspective to speak up and say, well, I think it's good because of this. And you have a constructive debate as opposed to a I want to win type of debate. The goal is not to just pick an idea, though. It's to understand the quality of the initial ideas that we have. So if you want to start off in the most simplest in the simplest form possible. This is another thing that my friend Chris from PBS Kids shared with me. A classic way to open a debate or critique session is to ask everyone to offer 2 pieces of feedback on an idea: what I like and what's missing for me. What works for me, what doesn't. When everyone does that, you have a clearer picture of how everyone feels. You have the case for each side, pro and con. And it's important to get everyone in the room to weigh in, to make sure that every voice in the room is heard. So once you do all of that for all of the ideas you've considered, then you have a clearer way to decide which is the 1 or 2 that you're going to move forward with and spend a little bit more time developing. So that is what I'm suggesting we do in our next breakout room session. We take this potential brilliant idea. Your conference organizer wants to replace the opening keynote at your annual conference with a game show style general session. And this is not something I made up. This is a story I heard from an association. So with that in mind, in our breakout rooms, offer 2 pieces of feedback: what you like about it and what's missing, what's not working for you. So Isabel, I think we can release people to the rooms again.
Rooms are opening right now. You should all be back in your original breakout rooms shortly.
lost you.
I hope you're feeling better.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that went well. Please leave any thoughts in the chat. There's one point that was made I think is really important, is that part of using the debate skill and the debate phase in new idea development is to figure out what, when I talk about downsides, it's not only what is maybe makes this idea weaker, but also could be a problem later on that if we fix it now, we could avoid a lot of pain, or we could avoid something new, basically bombing, so like, knowing what could go wrong with the game show style general session and anticipating that and designing for that would help make it a success. So that's one of the things that we hope to get at in this phase. You may have some what's missings for an idea, but still decide it's the one you want to pursue because you feel confident you'll be able to address the what's missings. Okay, moving on. Skill number 4, phase number 4, developing ideas, specifically building something physical often called a prototype that resembles what you're trying to do. Now, for this stage, let's play a little quiz game. Let's play Name That Famous Prototype. Here is prototype number 1. Type in the chat. What do we think this is? Correctly identified as the original iPad. The prototype was from 1983, and it wasn't released until 2010. It was originally named Bashful, which is a Snow White reference. And the premise was it was a computer that was also a book that you could learn to use in 20 minutes and take with you to be able to read wherever you would go. Original prototype, this is the original prototype for what? AC, our guest, is correctly identified as meal kit delivery services, which were originally developed in Sweden in 2007, but there are now over 150 different companies in the US, and it's a $2 billion global industry. And my wife and I have done a trial of pretty much maybe almost all 150 of them, I think. Number 3, this is the original prototype for what? Wow, got it right off the bat. The Super Soaker was invented in 1982 by NASA engineer Lonnie Johnson. It was actually, he invented it by accident. He was working on something for the Navy, like a water pressure valve for the Navy, and water shot across his bathroom. And his first thought was, man, that would be an incredible water gun. And so he took a few years and developed it, and it was sold by a company called Laramie, and then it was sold to Hasbro, and has generated over $1 billion in sales. It's made Lonnie Johnson a very rich inventor. This is the original prototype for wow, yeah, that's the check is throwing some people off here. Perhaps incredibly, and it is maybe a little bit of a giveaway with the logo up there. This was the original prototype for the iPhone, also first prototyped in 1983. And honestly, don't you get nostalgic for that $499 new iPhone price tag? Maybe not for the 4 gigs of memory. And finally, this is the original sketch of the prototype for what? Tough one, yeah. It took 5 years and 5,127 different versions, but finally James Dyson invented the bagless vacuum cleaner. And that was the original sketch for what he was trying to do. Tony, I agree. I hate bag vacuums. The bagless is the way to go. Thank you, James Dyson. So what all of these prototypes have in common is one thing. They were called MVPs, or minimum viable prototypes. And so there's this idea of the minimum I need to do for people to get what I'm trying to make and what's viable, what actually works. And there's a spot right in the middle where people get it and it sort of works, and you can get good feedback on whether or not it's something they care about. It means it's good enough to show people to get their reactions. This is a great quote from, if you've heard of the company IDEO, they're a famous design firm. They've invented a bunch of things, designed a bunch of things, including the Apple Mouse and the shopping cart. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. And wouldn't we love to replace 1,000 meetings? What prototyping also means is that you have to work together to bring your idea to life. It's again a much more worthwhile way to spend group time than it is coming up with ideas, because when you build something together, you have to make choices and you have to answer questions and you have to figure things out and you have to build something so that someone else understands what it is. Now, it's not all about building physical products. I mean, that's what I just showed you for the quiz, but there are other ways to prototype things. It can be a simulation that your team acts out. I've seen role playing be a great way to bring an idea alive. For instance, if your proposed solution is that new member video that we touched on a little bit earlier, the team can act out what would be in the video, or what they think could be in the video, or what the actors could do or should do in the video. Or if it's a process or logistics for an event, the team can provide a visual walkthrough in a role-playing scene of how perhaps a section of the conference floor will be set up. It could be a new app for an event registration. This is an example of one that was done in one of my workshops, where a group wanted to come up with an app that would show who else is going to the networking events, because they thought that was the only way that they could get their young professionals to come, is if they knew other young professionals were coming. Or it can be just a simple 5-step process for getting a certain type of member to join or to get more engaged once they do join. So admittedly, the prototyping stage is always a little bit tough with doing a group exercise, but here's the group exercise I want to put forth. You're proposing a new type of networking event and you want to present it to the board or to a committee or just to a few members. You can pick 3 objects or a scene to simulate what a networking event would be. Now, you can choose exactly how you want to do this. You can use one of your own ideas. I'm not specifying exactly what type of networking event that it is, but talk about how you could maybe stage a scene or put something together with rough materials that will demonstrate how a potential new networking event could actually work. So we'll take 5 minutes and do that.
Good.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Stretch run, fifth and final skill, demo. This is basically good old-fashioned show and tell. So what we're talking about here, there's actually two types of demoing or presenting ideas. That's the fifth and final skill and stage. The first version of that is user testing, where you get real-world feedback on the tangible version of your new idea. This is why a prototype is so important, is you could show it to 5 members or 5 potential users of that product or service and have them tell you what they think of it, and to see if what you imagined is what they gain from what you're putting in front of them, if it really is valuable to them. It's a critical step that gives the audience, the customer that you're designing for, a voice in the design of that new idea. And if you avoid this step, then you run the risk of, again, the healthcare association just kind of making something that they think is wonderful that the people who need to bless it don't necessarily understand or appreciate. This is a pretty famous meme in user design and product design, and it tells a very simple truth that, like, we can make things for people the way we think that they want them, but they will always, through their behavior, show us what it is that they actually want. So the general rule of thumb is that if you do what's called user testing, is you can show it to just 5 people. It only takes 5. You don't have to make it a huge production. You can just get feedback from 5 different folks that will offer you a breadth of feedback and help you avoid building a path that nobody is going to use. Now, the other version of demoing is pitching ideas to leadership. And so you may have heard of a technique called the 6 thinking hats. I decided to draw the 6 frowning bosses, the faces that we usually get when we present new ideas and they are met with a lack of enthusiasm, let's say. So how do we avoid this? Well, the answer comes from the original Ghostbusters movie. Now, if you remember this particular scene, Ghostbusters are thrown in jail, and because Walter Peck from the EPA visits their headquarters and realizes that they are holding all this radioactive ghost material, and that he wants, and it puts a huge strain on the city power grid. So he wants it shut down. He shuts it down and releases everything, all of the ghosts, back into the atmosphere. So in this meeting, Walter Peck from the EPA makes the point that these men should be thrown in jail, and essentially he doesn't really have a solution for what they do next. But Bill Murray's character steps forward and says, Mr. Mayor, if you let us out and we can stop this thing, then you will have saved the lives of millions of registered voters. And then the mayor points at Walter Peck and says, get him out of here. So when we look back at the facts of the case in this movie, Walter Peck wasn't actually wrong for what he was saying, but he didn't speak his audience's language. Bill Murray's character, Dr. Peter Venkman, did. He talked about saving millions of lives and registered voters. So that is the lesson of pitching ideas to people, is that you need to speak their language, not yours. Nancy Duarte runs probably the most famous presentation training company in America. The audience does not need to tune themselves to you. You need to tune your message to them. And one simple framework for how to do this is to use a what, so what, now what type of framework. Every pitch needs to show people what you have that's special, how it makes your organization better, and what it will allow you to do in the future. What you have that's special, how it makes your organization better, or how it serves your audience or your customer, how it makes their lives better, and what it will allow people to do in the future. That's what, so what, now what. So for our last exercise, we won't go into rooms, but you can use the chat, and we can use this particular webinar as something you need to pitch and say, let's say you're going back to your boss and they said, was the webinar worth it? And you can say, my most important takeaway was what, because so what, which allows us to now what. So if you have an answer to this question, you want to use that framework, go ahead and type it in the chat, but I will just wrap up with what we talked about today. These are the 5 skills: discovery, divergent thinking, debate, developing prototypes, demoing and presenting ideas. It's also the process that you can use to go from a very broad spectrum of understanding to a very specific solution. And the other great thing about working this way on teams is you develop team chemistry, you establish trust, you promote broader understanding of the organization and its mission by trying to solve its problems and make new things, and you get better at trying new ideas. These are all qualities that you're going to find in a true culture of innovative thinking. So, in addition to the handout that I think Isabel and Andrew referenced at the top of the webinar, the good news is all or most of the information that I presented in this webinar today is available on this particular Trello board. And I will drop the link into the chat right now. But I don't know if you guys use Trello, but I love it. So you can go to that. It's a public board, and you can click on all these little cards, and it has a lot of the information that I presented here today. So with that, I will just remind you that innovation is not about knowing the answers when you get started. It's about discovering them through a process and by using particular skills. So if in doubt, begin. Thank you very much. That is what's known as a wrap. This is the truest slide that I have in this presentation, and that's how to get in touch with me. And now we can do Q&A, or we can just hang out. You guys tell me.
Greg, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a few more minutes on this scheduled time, so just feel free to chime in.
If Ryan Evans is still on, I want to know what type of meat you're whacking with a brick. Oh, thanks, Pepper, for listening. I appreciate that.
I'm dropping in a few links in the chat right now. The first is Greg's website. The second is to his newsletter. He's got an awesome newsletter that he sends out every Wednesday. I'd encourage everyone to sign up for that and also connect with him on LinkedIn, and that link is there as well.
I should also say, any questions you have, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about anything, whether it's just understanding the stuff that was in the presentation or trying to incorporate it a little bit in the workplace. I'm always up for discussion and strategizing and helping you guys make work better.
Greg, I'm not seeing any questions, but I just want to thank you very much for your time and for leading this session. One of the pieces that I'm going to take away is the difference between convergent and divergent thinking and how that can help us out as a team. So thank you very much for that.
It's a wonderful light switch to flick back and forth. Yeah, divergent and convergent. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks to the U.S. Chamber and U.S. Chamber Foundation Institute for having me. I'm proud to be a graduate and a faculty member, and it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. And everyone, you can find out more about our upcoming webinar series on our website under the resources tab under curriculum on the top banner of our website. We also have a few more Centennial Challenge coins available if anyone would like to purchase those. Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate your time.
Sure. It looks like Heather just joined, so I could do the whole webinar again if she wants to.